All right, folks, for today's video, we will be replacing the shim slash gasket on the cam follower housing on a Cummins N14. Long story short, in my efforts to fix an injector problem up here and having to remove all of the push rods for the rocker arms, see, these push rods go down through the engine all the way from the top all the way down into here, into the cam follower, which is behind this plate over here. There's 3 of them, and there's a bunch of stuff in the way. But I had an injector issue. One of the injectors in this cylinder, cylinder number 4, was not firing. And in my efforts to determine why it was not firing, I ended up taking the engine all apart, all the way down to taking the cam follower out, because once I determined the injector was getting power, the only other reason for that cylinder not to be firing was a problem with the valves, the rocker arms, the push rods, the piston. So I had to determine that it wasn't any of those things. And then it ended up being my brand new injector that went bad, which is why I didn't think that was the problem, and it didn't seem to be the problem. It had power, it seemed like it had power and it should have been working, and I had no way to test it outside of the engine to determine if it was working or not. And I had a bent push rod in the past, and when a push rod is bent, it has a similar symptom. The cylinder will not fire because the rocker arm is not opening the valves right on the top of the engine. So anyway, in the process of taking my cam follower housing out and determining that that was not the problem and that the push rods and everything were good, I ended up screwing up the gasket on the cam follower housing. And so the result is we've got a massive oil leak that when the engine is running, it doesn't just drip, it runs out from under the housing. I don't think you can really see up under there. The gasket is all screwed up, and therefore when you run the engine, it's just running oil all over the place and all over the ground, making a big mess. And I cannot run it that way. And it appears that the front one is leaking as well, but it's a much slower leak, and it's been leaking for a while. So today we are going to replace that cam follower gasket shim. They call it a shim for a very specific reason, because depending on the thickness of that gasket, that will change the timing of the engine, the timing of the valves. Since the push rods come down into that cam follower, if it is out from the engine block any different than it was originally, it will change the amount that the push rods push the rocker arms down. And so, in order to change the gasket on the cam follower, you have to take the entire top of the engine off and take the push rods all out, take the rocker arms all off, take the push rods out, so that it will free up the cam follower. Then you can take the cam follower out, clean up the gasket, put a new gasket on it, and then put it back in, and then have to put all the push rods back in, the rocker arms back in. And now, because you've changed the dimensions, the depth of the gasket on the cam follower housing, you now have to adjust the valves on the top of the engine again. I just did that the other day, but now I'm gonna have to do it again when I replace this shim. So, I've got a brand new one right here. Let's get to it. Now, I already know from having done this a number of times that there are a few basic tools I need for this job. A 9/16 inch socket, 12-point 9/16 socket for taking the rocker arms off, a 7/16 12-point socket for taking the valve cover and the jake head off. Feeler gauges for adjusting the valve lash once I get everything back together. 9/16 and 1/2" wrenches for getting the cam follower housing out. First thing I'm going to do is pressure wash all this gunk off of there so I'm not working in a bunch of oil. Oil everywhere. First thing is to take that valve cover off. For these, once all of those are free, just lift this straight up, and I like to put this over here. And here's a gasket. This is a nice substantial gasket. And here's our jake heads. This is the Jacobs brake solenoid that takes oil pressure from the engine up through these tubes, sends them out here, and forces the exhaust valves down at just the right timing. Now again, 7/16 to take these off, but it has to be a 12-point 7/16 as we have here. There are 6 of these bolts, 4 on the corners and 1 here and here. You gotta remember to take your jake brake wire off. It connects to this pass-through to send power to the jake brake solenoid. Once you got all these bolts free, as we do now, you might just grab this and check and see if it's loose. See, this one's loose. Sometimes you have to take a rubber mallet and hit on the side here to free it up. Free up the gasket material that's between the jake head and the rocker arm housing. You take this jake head off and put it somewhere safe. Top of the tire is not necessarily the safest because it can fall off of there and you don't want it to fall off. Intake valve, exhaust valves. These rockers have to come off in order to get the push rods out, which will then free up the housing underneath. You do not have to take the injectors out. The injectors can stay in place. Keep your fuel system intact. However, because I know I'm going to be timing this thing, I want to preset the pistons at top dead center. This is going to have to be put somewhere else. I want to preset cylinder number 3 at top dead center because I know I'm going to have to adjust the valves on both 3 and 4. And I would rather do that right now while the rocker arms are still in place, so I can tell when number 3 is at top dead center. And you know that when both rocker arms are loose. There's instructions of how to get there, and then when you're there, both rocker arms will be loose. But anyway, it's a 33mm socket. You put it on a long handle like this and put it on this nut that is in here on this pulley. And under here, there is a little point. I don't know if you can see that. That you line up with markings on this pulley wheel. Right there we have, I think that says C. And so we need to rotate it to the right letter that correlates with that piston that cylinder being ready to be timed. The letter C on this pulley lined up with that point means that either cylinder 3 or 4 is ready to be timed. And I'm pretty sure, yep, see, we happen to be right there. Both have play in them, indicating that we are at top dead center on this. And if we were to rotate that around a full 360 degrees back to C, then we would be ready to do this one. So we're gonna leave it on 3 like this. And now we're gonna take these rocker arms off. A little piece of advice, I do not like to leave this in here because in case the starter gets engaged somehow, that could do some terrible damage. So let's put that over there. So now we take our 9/16 12-point socket, and sometimes these can take a lot of force, and I like to use a hammer to pound it loose if necessary. If you don't quite have the strength to loosen them, and I like to go back and forth and loosen them side to side a little at a time, because especially on one like this where there's a lot of pressure pushing on it, it can cock the rocker arm sideways one way or the other if you undo just one side first. So I like to do it in increments and work its way up. This one, there's no pressure or little pressure on it from the injector, so it's not as critical. Take these bolts out, set them to the side. Now if you can see, the rocker arms have a lot of distance between tops of the valves. And now just lift this straight up. Sometimes it doesn't like to come out. And make sure you keep this somewhere like this. This centerpiece can fall out, and then your rocker arms will be out of place. And you might forget which one goes where. In this case, we're gonna have to readjust the timing on them anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Now the push rods are free. You can pull these out. The big one always goes in the middle. The big one is the injector push rod. So, and again, because we're going to have to adjust the timing anyway, it doesn't matter which one of these goes back in, which one of the exhaust and intake push rods goes back in. They're exactly identical. Sometimes if one is worn down more than the other, it can be a little shorter than the other, and therefore putting it back in the wrong hole will change your valve timing, your valve clearance. But in this case, again, as I said, since we're changing the gasket on the cam follower housing, we're gonna have to adjust the timing anyway. So put these somewhere safe. Now we can take off cylinder number 4 rocker arms. So there we go. We'll put this one over here so we have the sides right, even though we're gonna have to adjust them anyway. And take these push rods out. These things you can probably just leave there if you're doing this job because they're not going anywhere. Again, those are something that could be worn differently, so you want them to go back in the same place unless you're doing this and having to adjust the valves anyway. Bunch of push rods. Now that we have the push rods out, there's nothing holding this in place anymore other than the nuts and bolts that are holding it on. But we have a bunch of shit in our way. The fuel filter, for one. I tried to do this the other day with the fuel filter in place because I didn't want to mess with it. And this fuel line that goes to the fuel filter and the fuel pump, I tried to leave that in place, but that too ended up being right in my way. And all of this wiring harness, ended up needing to take it apart from this cam follower housing. So we're gonna do that again. We're gonna get all this stuff out of my way so we can get that thing out of there. They're paving the road that I live on, so there's a bunch of dump trucks that keep going by, taunting me as I sit here with a parked truck, not making money. Okay, take this fuel filter off. Again, my check valve is non-existent on this thing. Apparently my fuel keeps running back into the tank. I really need to fix that. And it's allowing the fuel to run back through the line, back into the tank. and then this thing doesn't want to start. It is 1 inch, so we gotta loosen this one. Only way to get that cover off is to take the whole top of the engine off over those cylinders and do what I'm demonstrating here. Need another drink of coffee. Would you look here? Found me another 1 inch wrench. Stay on there, you. This is my motivator. We're gonna motivate this wrench to give us more. There we go. See, we got that wrench up against the top of the air compressor so it will hold. And now we can knock that loose. There we go. Now, that hose could be in need of replacing. It's looking pretty ugly. But that hose definitely appears to be pretty screwed. My glove's finger came off. Okay. Now that is definitely not a check valve. There's nothing in that. It's just a straight pass through there. See if we can see inside this one, see if there's a check valve in there. Does not look like it. If there's no check valves, no wonder this damn thing is bleeding fuel back into the tank. There needs to be a check valve either here or up here, and neither of those places appears to have one. Okay, it's like over an hour later. I went and had a new fuel hose made for here because I realized the other one on the back side was so rotted out and was surely sucking air, and this thing has been acting like it's been sucking air for a while. Stupid thing is, this part here is supposed to be a check valve, and it goes into the side of the engine there. There's a backing plate to the ECM that fuel runs through to keep the ECM separated and cooled from the engine. And this is supposed to be a check valve. Well, the doofus that made my hose for me comes back out and tells me the fitting that goes there does not fit in here, so then he gives me this new one. The problem is I need to replace this with a check valve, and if I do so, it's not gonna fit in here now with this new hose. So that's gonna be fun to deal with when the time comes. I really need a check valve in there. You can also put a check valve here, and that will be the same. But yes, I don't got much time. Always up against the clock. So, first of all, we gotta take the nuts off that are holding the ground cables on here and these cables in the way. Okay, now we've got 6 9/16 bolts holding this thing in here. Unplug this sensor cable as well. And we should be able to pull this thing out now. Now this is rather heavy and it's kind of awkward up in here. What is hanging you up? There we go. Now we're gonna try to come out. Get down on my knees here, reach up from underneath so that I could pull this out. All the cam followers fall down, and we get this up out of here. And there's the camshaft going through there. There's all our missing gasket. That big chunk off of there. Old gasket. Says 042, and the one I got is an 017. And you can see where these rollers go on the camshaft in there, and depending on how deep this housing is, as in how thick the gasket is. If the gasket's thicker, it holds it out further away from the engine, and therefore the rollers are at a different position on the camshaft, which is what affects the intake and exhaust valves and the rocker arms. And clean this all off. The best thing is to put the gasket on there, not on the housing, because you're trying to hold the housing. Let's verify that this gasket is even the right size. That would be it. Okay, it's over the posts. Stick it on there. Now let's see if we can wrestle this thing back in there. Get it. We're still trying to fuck up the gasket. Okay, go up in there. Nice and easy like. It's kind of on the pins, but I don't really trust it. So I'm gonna put those top bolts in. This one without a post on it. Got one more bolt to put in here. Try to tighten this thing down and hope it pulls onto those pins nice and straight. Oh yeah, there it goes. It's sucking it down. It's gonna squeeze that sealant out the sides. This thing is guaranteed not to leak now. We got that gasket in there good. That front one's still gonna need to be done sometime, but it's not nearly as bad of a leak. It's just a seep, really. Whereas this one, this was just spewing oil while the engine was running because there was so much gasket material missing. I'll rat it and reconnect this sensor. Let's reconnect this sensor. Let's put this ground cable back on, this ground cable back on. Put both these ground cables over here. Put this wire loom support back on and swap our socket for the 1/2 inch. Tighten down the ground cables and tighten down this wire loom holder. Okay, got all our grounds on, got our sensors on, wire loom holder, it's all connected. Now for our fuel line again, get our 1-inch wrench, 1-inch wrench. This little guy that is supposed to be a check valve but is not. I was quoted $175 for that check valve, which is, if I have to do that, okay. But I've seen it for as low as $38 online, but then some of the feedback was that it came without the check valve portion of it, which would basically just be this fitting by itself, and that doesn't do us any good. We've got to have a check valve in the system. I already paid $165 for this, not counting this part. This part's reused here, but this part, $165 I just paid for that sucker. Can you believe that? Okay, that's gonna be a bit of a challenge to get on there, isn't it? They may have made it a little bit long. That is a real bitch. It needed to be no longer than it was. And they apparently made it longer. This is a real bitch. Okay, maybe if we put it out to the side, no. They probably thought a little bit extra length wouldn't be a problem. Little did they know. Okay, I think we got that started. What a nightmare. Yeah, some of you might be thinking when your cam follower gasket is leaking, and you might think, oh, I just got to take that plate off the side of the engine and replace the gasket and put it back on and we're good to go, no more oil leak. But no, you got to take just about half a day or more, depending on what issues you run into in the process, to take half the engine apart just to replace that one stupid gasket. And like I said, it's not a gasket, it's actually a shim. You'll notice it had measurement numbers on it, thickness measurement numbers, because replacing it changes the dimensions, changes the depth of the housing, which then affects the position of the rollers on the camshaft. Now we have to fill up our fuel filter. Son of a bitch. New hose because they made it too bloody long. Oh, damn it. You son. Like that. Frickin' torques me like no other. Hopefully there's room for it this time. Okay, good. Now the next step is to put the push rods and rocker arms back on. Look down in there and make sure I can see all of the cam followers lined up. Ooh, exhaust push valve, or push rod 1. Line it up. Okay, it's in place. It's easy when putting these things back in to accidentally miss the cam follower down there. And when that happens, the push rod can fall down inside of the engine. And when the crankshaft comes around, it can bend the push rod. Don't ask me how I know. You gotta make sure that they are in there. Sometimes if you lightly pick up on it, it'll pull the cam roller up with it, and you can tell that it's in place because you can't always see down in there. Right now I can see down in there. The light's shining down in there where I can see that the ends of the push rods are where they're supposed to be. But you want to make sure that they're definitely seated in the right spot. So like I said, they can be off to the side, off to one side or the other, and that's not good. They will get bent. Injector's still in place, so put our rocker arm back on. Make sure that the back of the rocker arms line up and go into the push rods. They can sit up on top of the edge, and you don't want that. You want them down inside. Sometimes you have to use a screwdriver down in here to line it up. And this rocker arm assembly, make sure that it's all lined up. There's this little aligning pin here that you can tell the orientation is right, because these can only go on one way. If they're flipped, they're not going to go onto that pin. And I made sure all of the push rods are lined up with the back side of the rocker arms. Tighten them down in the same way I loosened them incrementally side to side. You should do the same thing when tightening them down. Remember, this one is pushing down the intake valve pretty far because this one is not at top dead center. This one is. I mean, there's definitely a foot-pound of torque specification on these bolts, but I'm not gonna look it up. This hole right here is the hole that the Jake brakes get the Jake heads get their pressure from. So it's important that that hole is lined up with the gasket right. On the intake, we need a 14. Let's see, it won't even fit in there. And on the exhaust, we needed 27. And that will not fit in there either. All right, now we already made sure that our marking is on C, which is 3 on this go around, and then we'll have to rotate it a full engine rotation back to C in order to do 4. Let's loosen up the injector jam nut. Okay, now they say to crank it down to 25 foot-pounds, which is not very much. Back it off and crank it down again till the bottom's out. This is to push the plunger up and down a few times to evacuate any fuel that is in the fuel injector, supposedly. I'm trying to guess about 25 foot-pounds. But then you're supposed to back this one off 2 flats. So I like to line up the point here, and it would be 1, 2 for 2 flats. So there's 1 point that way, and then 2 points that way. And then tighten the jam nut down. Okay, now intake valve we'll do first. Put that under there. Okay, it's just got some tension on it. Make sure it's still got the proper tension on it. You want to be able to move it, but not be wedged in there. And sometimes I find that it works to leave it in there. And then you get it tightened down, and you're perfect. Now the 27 for the exhaust. Get it just right. Okay, perfect. Now, rotate this engine all the way around to where we're back at the C again here. Fighting the engine compression. There's A. Lots of compression here. Get it. Lined up with that little point. Okay, right there. Now, number 4 should be loose. Yep, both of them loose. But it feels there's not the proper play in there. So, again, we're going to loosen the jam nut on the injector. About 25 foot-pounds. And then back off 2 flats. I'm going off this point that's facing right in line with the rocker arm. 1, 2. And don't forget to tighten that jam nut down. Now, loosen the jam nuts on these rocker arms. There's the intake and exhaust. The intake is the 2 ones on the middle. The exhaust is on the outside again. Let's do the intake first. So look for the 14. Tighten it down to where it's got some friction on there. Tighten the jam nut, but make sure it's good. This is where the screwdriver comes in handy because it's trying to tension to the left on that so it stays put. It's like tighten that jam nut. And make sure we're still good. Yep, we're still good on that. Exhaust next. We're almost done with this thing. Got way too much in there right now because it backed it way off when I took the jam nut off. Okay, tighten up. Put that jam nut down. That one's gonna stay put. And we're perfect. Okay, now to put the Jake head back on. Line up the bolts, tighten these down. I like to reconnect my electrical connection to the Jake brake while I'm thinking about it if I see it loose like that, because later I might forget. Okay, good enough. We don't need to worry about cleanliness right now. We just needed to fix the oil leak and to put this gasket here. Line up the bolts. I like to run all these down by hand first because they're so loose and easy. And now I do believe we are ready to start it up. Okay, now remember it's going to be sucking a lot of air, so it's going to crank for a while before it starts. Now it might suck some more air. That's a nice smooth acceleration now. That's how we replace the cam follower housing gasket.